And then on top of that, you have people that are ideologically driven who might actually be injecting fake news on purpose to push their political goals. And thus we have the downward spiral. I'm just going to say it. Right now, there isn't any truth. Certainly, there are things that are true, but the way things are going, facts don't matter, and everything seems to be made up. You've got people who are ideologically driven, who are just going to push the narrative that they want to exist. These people, in my opinion, really are evil. And I don't use evil lightly. But you have to think about the motivations of someone who feels they have a right to deceive you in order to make you obey the way they want the world to be. I believe people have a right to information. They have a right to know what's happening, and that if we do our best and inform everybody of what's happening, then people will be better equipped to make informed decisions. But when you look at what's been happening in news, take for instance this profile from Jordan Peterson. For some reason, they decided to include a paragraph about Alec Minassian, where they say, Mr. Minassian declared himself to be part of a misogynist group whose members call themselves incels. This is the man who ran a bunch of people over in Toronto. This article is a profile on Jordan Peterson. Why, in a profile on Jordan Peterson, are they talking about incels and Alec Minassian? Well, whatever their intention is, they're going to create some kind of association that people are going to somehow attribute Jordan Peterson to this kind of ideology, which is absolutely absurd and unfair. But what they're also doing is publishing unconfirmed rumor and a potential hoax as a fact. Because what constitutes facts these days? Apparently, very little. Going back in time, let's talk about this Facebook post. This is apparently a post from the attacker saying, "The incel rebellion has begun. All hail Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger." Following that story, there was a wave of news articles from various mainstream outlets talking about how incels were dangerous, they were the new boogeyman, and definitively stating that this guy, this Alec Minassian, was an incel based off of this highly dubious archive of a Facebook post. In fact, when we look at reporting on the post, this from the Toronto Star, Facebook said it deleted an account which used the name and photo of Alec Minassian to make this post, apparently on the same day that he was arrested after a van struck numerous pedestrians, killing 10. They say there was also questions raised about the timing of the post. An archive of the Facebook page appears to show a timestamp of 1:27 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, shortly after police started receiving calls about a van that had jumped the curb and struck pedestrians. An image of the Facebook message, which was posted anonymously to 4chan, suggested it was published at around 2:15 p.m. However, when Minassian would have already been in police custody. Facebook lets users change the time and date of a post, raising the possibility the account may have been hacked and modified. A spokesperson for Facebook Canada would not answer specific questions about the timing of the post, but said the company believed it was legitimate and deleted the account, which had been made with Minassian's name and photo. So let's be real about what happened. Is it possible that Minassian actually made the post? Sure, absolutely. Do we know for sure? Absolutely not. So should a journalist be stating this as fact? No, they shouldn't, but the New York Times has repeatedly done this. And then we have to ask ourselves, why would the New York Times include something that is not confirmed in a profile about Jordan Peterson? So you know what? I think I'm going to use the exact same standard as the New York Times. That if there is a single post that can't be confirmed but looks like it may have been real, that's good enough for confirmation, right? Okay, then by using the New York Times standards, I am going to officially confirm right now that Jordan Peterson eats raw chicken, and I can prove it. On Twitter, Jordan Peterson sent me this private direct message where he said, "Thanks for following me on Twitter. I wanted to let you know I really enjoy eating raw chicken. Finger licking good." And then I responded, okay, sure, thanks for that, Dr. Peterson, and a thumbs up. And what you can see is that this is my actual Twitter profile. We have the Royal Wedding Live. Look, this is really Twitter right here. You got all these trends from today, David Beckham, Harry and Meghan. It is actually the Twitter website. And it's fake. I made it in about 30 seconds. In about 30 seconds, I made a post that appears to be from December it's the actual Twitter website of Dr. Jordan Peterson saying he eats raw chicken. Is that proof? Absolutely not. So why is it then that a narrative will repeatedly use something that was never confirmed? But when you realize that you have writers for the New York Times, which is supposed to be one of the bastions of great journalism, asserting unconfirmed potential hoaxes as fact, injecting that into a story about someone else, you have to wonder, what can you really believe and why should you believe it? The New York Times doesn't deserve your trust if they're going to push something as dubious as this. In today's news, we have information about the Texas shooter from yesterday, and the Daily Beast says he posted neo-Nazi imagery online. Before allegedly killing at least 8 people, he apparently posted online images of a Nazi medal, a musician favored by the alt-right, and a Born to Kill t-shirt. This story is by Kelly Weil and Kate Bricolette. In the image, he actually has a sickle and hammer star, and an iron cross, and Cthulhu. Clearly, he didn't have a cohesive ideology. So I have to wonder then why Kelly Weil and Kate Bricolette would would post a headline that he posted neo-Nazi imagery online. Sure, like I said, it is true, technically, but it's unfair. What do you think's gonna happen when the layman reads this story? They're going to assume this guy was a white supremacist. What do you think the layman is going to think when they read that Jordan Peterson profile? They're going to assume the New York Times is correct. They're going to assume that the story about the incel Toronto driver is also factually correct, even though it probably isn't. And here's why you should remember Kelly Weil, because she wrote a story back in October. Alt-right frames protesters as pedophiles with fake NAMBLA sign. When Columbia students denounced Mike Cernovich, a masked man jumped in front of them, raised a child molester banner, and the photo went viral. Even Trump Jr. liked it. The alt-right framed student protesters as pedophiles on Monday night. Within 90 minutes, even Donald Trump Jr. had bought into the hoax. When this story came out, I reached out to the Daily Beast and to Weil about how they were able to confirm that it was the alt-right that perpetrated this hoax. Unfortunately, no one responded. Of course not. I contacted their PR department, I contacted their editorial department, and I even contacted Kelly Weil personally, and none of them got back to me. Because there is no proof that the alt-right did any of this. So why then did the Daily Beast publish this as fact? And why then are we seeing more dishonest reporting from Kelly Weil? The information that we receive on a daily basis is derivative of stories from the past. Take into consideration right now that the story from the Daily Beast in October is likely not true. There's no evidence to suggest that it is true, but people are going to believe it. They're going to half remember that story and say, oh yeah, didn't the alt-right do some hoax back at Columbia? And that's going to get added to another story. The incel post on Facebook that is now added to the New York Times is added to another story in the Times that is probably not true, but it becomes true. Now go further back. You'll start to realize that our recent history is slowly becoming a twisted narrative of ideology and fake news, and we don't know how far back it really goes. This, in and of itself, is a huge problem, and I think you can all recognize that right now. I have clearly shown how easy it is to fabricate direct messages, and we're headed into a darker future where it's going to become even harder to know what's actually happening. But what is the result of this highly polarized fake news? A couple days ago, we saw this post on Reddit. It's called The Waterfall of Polarization: Left versus Right Voting Ideology of Every Member of Congress in the Last 100 Years. This chart shows you how people vote. And we can see that in the 1950s and the mid-1900s, there's overlap. Some red is over on the blue side, and some blue is over on the red side. As time goes on, you can see that it's actually fairly maintained. These gaps here show that very few Congress members kept their seats. But something interesting happened as we entered the late 90s and moved into the 2000s. Here we can see 2009 was the last time there was any overlap of right-left voting between Democrats and Republicans. So what happened in this mid-2000s to late 2000s that pushed us all to the far left and the far right? And it's the rise of digital media and the internet. Social media has allowed us to trap ourselves in bubbles where we only hear things that complement our view of the world, something that I'm sure many of you have heard about and I've talked about before. But then look at the examples I gave previously. It's this new wave of crap journalism. I don't think journalism has always been perfect, but if you look back in the day, we often romanticize journalists of yesteryear who did a better job. And there were very few publications, so they tended to stay middle of the road. Today, you have people who don't fact check, assume things are true, and add them to their pieces. You have editors who don't fact check and add them to their pieces. And then on top of that, you have people that are ideologically driven who might actually be injecting fake news on purpose to push their political goals. And thus we have the downward spiral. In a post-truth era, where fake news gets spread, where news stories cite old stories citing fake news, people are pushing themselves further and further apart from each other, like we see in the graph. And then what happens is, when someone is so far away from the other person, they become ideologically driven, choosing to double down on their lies when they know they're lies because they truly believe the other side is pure evil and they can't relate to them anymore. Essentially, the way I see it, and this is just my theory, is that as people formed bubbles because of digital media, because these companies are failing and they hire poor journalists, they have actually created an atmosphere where being ideologically driven is welcome and important. There was a conversation happening a few years ago, and it's still happening today, about mission-driven storytelling, about how there's no such thing as objective journalism, about how you have to believe in something and fight for something. And this is often used as an excuse to lie to people, because you know what? The ends justify the means. Unfortunately, I don't believe that. But when we look at the evidence and when we look at what's happening, you have to realize things are really, really bad. There's no middle ground anymore, and there's no honesty. Very, very few people are being honest about what's happening. I think when we talk about who is truly being honest, we can look to the intellectual dark web, as it's often referred. These are people that I feel tend to do a good job of trying to be honest. Obviously, they're not perfect, and there are people associated with this group who are probably not honest, because not everybody is. But it seems like whatever this intellectual dark web is, it's people trying to better understand what's happening and be honest about what's really going on. Perhaps we need a hardcore skeptic movement, people who are just going to doubt everything the media says, because, for the third time, as I've already explained in many examples, you can see just how often fake stories become history. It makes me fearful when you realize that the past might actually be just as fake as what we're seeing today. That if stories from October are factually untrue and never corrected, what about stories from 20 years ago? How many of those stories are factually untrue but added to the history books and now widely believed by the new generation that what really happened were these stories, but maybe these stories are derivative of fake news as well? How do we know? We won't. We need people who care more about the truth, and unfortunately, too many people don't. From the individuals who like reading the news to those who write the fake news and perpetuate the BS stories to push their ideology, we're in deep trouble. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I think, personally, the correlation between the waterfall of polarization, this chart showing the split, and news, this is all just my theory. You know, I don't want to say this is confirmed fact or anything like that, but when I look at what's happening with news and fake stories, and then I see this polarization, that's what I see. I see people further pushing themselves apart and then reveling in it and enjoying it. But what do you think? We'll keep the conversation going in the comments below. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. Stay tuned, new videos every day at 4 p.m. Thank you all so much for hanging out, and I'll see you all tomorrow.